Welcome to Gambling Harms and Domestic Abuse, resource for housing professionals. I'm Natasha Devon. In this series, we're exploring the intersection between gambling harms and domestic abuse. This is part of a project funded by the Gambling Commission and led by Mercy Denedo from Durham University, in partnership with Amanze Ejiogu from Sheffield Hallam, Chibuzo Ejiogu from Cranfield University, Katy Brookfield from Nottingham University, Liz Riley from Betknowmore UK, and Kelly Henderson from Addressing Domestic Abuse. In this episode, we'll be exploring a new resource called Gambling Harms and Domestic Abuse, resource for housing professionals. It's designed to help housing professionals recognise when gambling harms and domestic abuse may be affecting tenants and to understand how to respond safely and effectively. The resource is structured around the 3 R's: recognise, respond, and refer. And in this episode, we are looking at recognise. With me today are Professor Amanze Ejiogu from the Sheffield Hallam University and part of this project's research team, and Stephanie Morphew, who is the policy lead for domestic abuse at the Chartered Institute of Housing, and who's also on the advisory board for this project. Amanze, to begin with, tell me a little bit more about this research project and how it led you to creating this resource.
We started out looking at gambling and domestic abuse and trying to see how do those two intersect and what kind of impact does the intersection of these have on housing, especially for the victims of gambling-related domestic abuse. And so what we did was that we did a series of interviews with survivors, victims, with practitioners both in the gambling space and in the domestic abuse space. And so out of our findings from this, we've tried to develop a tool which should be helpful to the housing sector in trying to tackle and provide support for people who've suffered from gambling-related domestic abuse.
That sounds really important. It's a really important part of the picture that is often missed. Can you talk us through what the resource actually says about how housing officers and other housing professionals should recognise gambling harms and domestic abuse?
So what we've done with the online resource is that we've structured it around 3 R's. So recognise, respond, and refer. And so in terms of recognition, the first thing is housing officers who are on the front line should be able to recognize when somebody is disclosing gambling-related domestic abuse. And we've tried to say, two kind of key things. One of them is they should have this sort of professional curiosity. So when people present with things like low mood, anxiety, social isolation, or they've not paid their rent in a while, they go in for visits and the condition of the house has deteriorated. People are not spending on food any longer. People are not, buying the things they did. The house, maybe they get kind of repair jobs which indicate that some violence has taken place in the house. They should be a bit more inquisitive, a bit more, try to find out what the root cause of these are. They may be gambling-related domestic abuse, they may not, but they should have that kind of professional curiosity. The second is they need to try to build up some kind of trust with people so that disclosure is easier. So without trust, these women will not disclose. So they need in their course of interaction with them to build up that trust, which will enable them disclose. So the toolkit in terms of recognize, tries to say how can we build trust and how can we build that professional curiosity. What are the things we can do?
So it's really just having it in your mind that this could be a possibility in a situation where there may be domestic abuse or there are issues with housing. And you said, there may be gambling harms present or there may not. Is there anything in particular that housing professionals should be looking out for that would indicate that gambling harms are present?
There are general indicators, so rent arrears. So gambling harms could be in terms of financial, so it could be financial abuse, it could be it could present as, violence or other types of abuse. And so there's a range of things which they would look out for. But again, these might not be specific to gambling. It's that questioning attitude which they need to then have to try to, tease out what is going on.
And Stephanie, turning to you now, as the policy lead on domestic abuse at the Chartered Institute of Housing, what challenge do you think that your members might face when they're trying to recognise gambling and domestic abuse?
So CIH represents a range of housing services from housing associations, local authorities, exempt supported housing providers, to name some. This comprises a raft of different rules. And this means each professional will have slightly different regulatory commitments to uphold. And additionally, regulation's never static. And for customer-facing roles, it's important that when those changes occur, they're fed down and accompanied by training or discussion. And where there is no regulation in place, which is the case for the toolkit that Amanze and everyone has put together, culture and best practice become key in driving positive outcomes for service users. So many housing professionals may be working using standardized tools such as the Dash risk assessment. And what this toolkit has done really helpfully and cleverly is layered over answers related to gambling harms and domestic abuse over tools that are already used by the housing provider. So that can deal with the challenges of, is this another thing that I need to remember? I am really burnt out. I have so many people coming to me with very harrowing stories. How can I use the tools at my disposal already to foster that professional curiosity?
And if we're talking about culture, I mean, that can be quite a nebulous concept, can't it? And it can be hard to pin down. But you've already touched on it a bit. But are there other ways that we can overcome those challenges that your members might be facing?
I'd like to encourage any organisation, whether it's a housing one, to be interested in equipping their staff with understanding gambling harms, domestic abuse, and the relationship to one another, to promote continuous learning. And that's how it gets embedded into the culture. And then it creates an environment whereby informal and formal professional development and peer learning is just built into the day-to-day service delivery. So at the Chartered Institute of Housing, organisations that have multiple members can establish CIH clubs, and they come together, choose a pertinent topic, they focus on it, and people from across the organisation come together to talk about it. And that helps address the challenge of learning how to recognise and how to respond to domestic abuse. There's a really useful definition from the report about professional curiosity, which Amanze was talking about. It's about being clear about our responsibility in managing risk rather than making assumptions or taking things at face value. It involves using multiple sources of information to understand more about the situation and what pieces are missing. So it's making sure that domestic abuse is seen as everybody's responsibility, not just these frontline workers who might be the first point of contact, but also in money matters teams that might see a missed rental payment or some kind of difficulty financially, and that all of these teams are talking together and have been equipped with the knowledge about what domestic abuse looks like and can have as part of its picture, which is gambling related harms in this instance.
It's so interesting because the common thread in what both of you are saying is that this just needs to be an option that professionals in various different teams keep in their mind. And it feels like at the moment that might not necessarily be the case. Amanze, for housing professionals who are listening and would like to use this resource, how can they access it?
Well, we'll have a copy of the report, which they'll be able to access through the Durham University website or through the Addressing Domestic Abuse website. We'll also have the online resource, which they should be able to access through dagamblinghams.co.uk, but also there will be links available through the Durham University website. And then we'll have this series of podcasts also available through those channels.
And do you think that this resource could possibly be useful beyond the housing sector as well?
I think it could be useful in any kind of frontline situation, because if you peel it back, we are looking at Recognize being anchored on professional curiosity and building that trust. And in any kind of frontline service, you want the frontline workers to have those kind of things, that professional curiosity, so that when somebody comes, they try to, ask the questions, to not make those assumptions, but ask, dig a bit deeper, but at the same time build the trust and the rapport with the person, so that there's that kind of confidence in the frontline staff that they can tell them things and they will be listened to.
There's also, not just in this sector, but I think it's quite important to know that you're not just a business with customers or service users, you're also an employer, and your employees could be facing domestic abuse, which means that if managers and if organisations are aware of this, they might see where distress is coming up in their employees.
Well, I think from everything that we've spoken about today, it's clear that this recognition that you're talking about, having it in your mind as an option, is a really important first step towards safety. And housing professionals are often amongst the first people to notice when something isn't right. Having the confidence to ask the right questions, building that trust that both of you were talking about, that can truly change lives. My thanks to Professor Amanze Ejiogu and Stephanie Morphew for joining me today. I'm Natasha Devon, and thank you for listening.